12 Years Across Borders, a memoir by Ch.4, Chapter 4, The Room with the Tower. Before we begin, one note. What follows is a record of 12 years of work as a cross-border medical coordinator. It is not medical advice and not a treatment recommendation. If you or someone in your family is facing a similar situation, please speak with your own physician. Alright, let's begin. A business does not fail all at once. It fails the way a tap closes someone on the other side of the wall, turns the handle a quarter turn, and the stream thins. And you do not notice until the basin stops filling. In the spring of 2015, I was driving to Kurume 4 and sometimes 5 days a week. By the autumn, I was driving there once a month. The reason was simple. Another interpreter had set up near the university. He was also Taiwanese. He had married a local woman and settled in Kurume itself, 10 minutes from the cancer vaccine center. I lived 90 minutes away in Fukuoka. His rates were lower than mine. In the logic of a family flying in from Taipei with a dying father and a budget measured against the value of their house, the choice was obvious. I would have made the same choice. By then I had a company. I had registered Xingyi Hao in the summer of 2015, put up the capital, taken a visa, hired a Japanese employee named D, and signed a commercial lease for an office in Hokkaido. The Japanese employee required a salary on the 25th of each month. The lease required rent on the 1st. Neither of these obligations was interested in whether the patient still chose me. For 4 months, revenue was close to zero. I paid the salary and the rent out of personal savings I had set aside during the years of interpretation work before the company existed. I took on whatever side business looked like it might convert. Import inquiries. A short attempt at selling Japanese cosmetics into Taiwan through a friend with a small e-commerce account. A half-serious conversation about exporting frozen mackerel. None of it came to anything. Every morning I sat at the office desk and worked through a list of things that would not earn me money that day. For 4 months, I asked myself every hour what I thought I was doing. The question came from the patients themselves, the ones who were still asking me to find them something. Mr. Lin, is there anything else? Anything besides the Kurume trial? You can ignore that question once. You cannot ignore it 20 times. After the 20th time I started searching, Tokyo had a whole ecosystem of private immunotherapy clinics by LZ15. Most of them were in Ginza or Roppongi, where a clinic address functions the way a Rolex does on a wrist shohan for money. European-style interiors, glass walls, marble lobbies. I walked into 2 of them. What I was looking for was not marble. I was looking for a place that could handle a patient when things went wrong. My patients, by the time they found me, were usually the kind of patients where things went wrong. A beautiful waiting room does not help a man whose tumor is eroding into a blood vessel at 2 in the morning. Most of the Ginza clinics had framed diplomas and an espresso machine and not much else. Then I came across something called fusion cell therapy. The written material described it as a technique still in study at the time, with its conceptual origins in work done years earlier at an American university. The idea as presented was to combine inactivated tumor cells with dendritic cells, the immune system's teachers, so that the immune system would learn to recognize the tumor's signature and attack it. Whether the technique delivered what its proponents said it delivered was, even then, not something I was qualified to judge. It was investigational. I understood that word in a narrow, practical sense, not approved, not proven, but being worked on. A clinic in Tokyo was one of the places offering it. In this book, I will call it a clinic, but the actual name, a matter of later public record, was Acti Clinic in Minato. The nominal director was a physician I will call Dr. F. I wrote to him 2 or 3 times, introducing myself and my work. His reply was short. If you want to talk, come to Tokyo. Fukuoka to Tokyo is about the distance of 3 Taiwans stacked end to end. A round trip ticket, a business hotel for a night, the trains from the airport and back. Call it a 60,000 each time, about 520.15 rates. In a year with no revenue, that number mattered. I went anyway. If I did not go, there was no next move. Dr. F turned out to be a mild-mannered older man, rounder than Dr. IT in Kurume Chatia. Avuncular. The kind of doctor who puts a hand on a patient's shoulder when he speaks. If I had been asked to sketch from central casting a physician who runs a small clinic in Tokyo, I would have drawn Dr. F. A clinic itself was housed in an ordinary office building in Minato-ku on the east side of central Tokyo. The laboratory and the consultation rooms were on the same floor. Nothing about the space was luxurious. The floors were linoleum. The walls were beige. The waiting area had 4 chairs. There was, however, one detail about the office. From several of its windows, because it was in Minato-ku, you could see Tokyo Tower. Close enough that on a clear afternoon the orange and white lattice filled a good third of the glass. One afternoon, during a meeting that broke for a pause, the C Corporation staff went to a back corner to smoke. I do not smoke, but I went along. In any company, the real information lies with the junior staff at the smoking spot, not with the director at the conference table. One of them exhaled a stream of smoke at the window and pointed. Mr. Lin, Tokyo Tower. That's our tower. There was. The tower looked the way it looks in postcards, absurdly close, absurdly bright. A thing I had grown up seeing in movies, now sitting 20 stories from a conference room, where we discussed the paperwork around terminal cancer patients. A clinic's address was in Minato-ku. The window had Tokyo Tower in it. On paper and through a window, the operation looked like a real operation. An address does not lie. A skyline does not lie. What happens inside the walls is something you cannot see from either. That last sentence I did not learn for another 18 months. Getting a clinic to take me on as a coordinator required clearing C Corporation's internal review. I prepared a self-introduction, a description of my case history, a crisis protocol. I flew to Tokyo 3 more times. After about 6 months, we had something that looked like a working relationship. I thought I had built the second leg of the business. Not long after the arrangement firmed up, I got a phone call from the wife of a patient I will call Mr. T. She told me her husband had decided against the Kurume peptide trial. He wanted something else. They had read about the fusion cell protocol. They wanted to fly over. I met Mr. T for the first time at the clinic's front door. Neither of us had seen the other's face. Oh, Mr. T, yes, good. Let's go up. That was the whole introduction. He was 1 year older than me. Same generation. A Taiwanese businessman in his 30s in a dark polo shirt, carrying a small overnight bag. I had expected the diminished posture I had learned to recognize in patients by then. The stoop of a person whose body was fighting something. Mr. T did not have it. He was upright, direct, alert. I had misread him entirely. Over the months that followed, I pieced together how Mr. T had ended up walking through that door. And it turned out to be the part of his story that stayed with me longer than the treatment itself. When he was diagnosed in Taipei, Mr. T did not run to a hospital. He did not cry. He did not call specialists. The first thing he did, he told me later, was take a short trip. He told his family he needed to walk for a few days and clear his head, and he left. When he came back, he started closing loops. He handed off the parts of his business that needed handing off. He made sure his family's finances were organized. He called the people he wanted to see one more time, and he saw them. Only after that, deliberately, did he walk into the first treatment room. Most patients I had met did the opposite. Most patients got the diagnosis and fell apart. In some order, the crying, the frantic Googling, the hunting for second opinions, the grasping at anything that looked like hope. That is how most humans respond to the news that they are going to die. Mr. T's response was the minority report. I came to believe, watching him, that the calmness with which he walked into treatment was part of why his course went the way it did. Not because calmness cures cancers, it does not, but because a patient who has made his peace arrives in a better starting condition than a patient who is already in pieces. Mr. T had also done his homework. He had read the papers, compared the dose-response data on anti-PD-1 agents, and worked out before he ever landed in Tokyo that for his particular cancer type the combination he wanted was anti-PD-1 immunotherapy alongside the investigational fusion cell protocol, alongside a conventional chemotherapy backbone. In 2016, that was not a simple combination to arrange across 2 jurisdictions. He built the plan himself and brought it with him. One detail struck me. Every trip he made from Taipei to Japan, he flew a budget carrier. Not China Airlines, not EVA. Peach or Jetstar, whatever the cheap ticket was that week. He stayed at an ordinary business hotel, the kind where the room is 8 square meters and the breakfast buffet is rice and miso soup. I asked him once why I did not fly business class. He shrugged. Short flight. Clean bed. Same result. Why waste money when the distance is this short? A man running a substantial business, flying to Tokyo to treat a life-threatening cancer, on a budget carrier and into a 9 Bosnane Nai hotel. Later, when I started spending time with the people on the Chinese side of the story, with the black sedans at the airport and the suites at the Four Seasons and the dinners that cost a month of my rent, I would think back to Mr. T and understand what I had been looking at. Spend on what matters. Don't spend on what doesn't. What I understood at the time about the biology of the protocol was what Dr. F and the C Corporation staff explained to me. Some of that explanation turned out later to be more confident than underlying science warranted. The people across the table from me were the specialists. I translated what they said. I believed what they said. Only after a clinic collapsed did I start to understand how much of what I had been told did not hold up under careful questioning. I was not cautious enough. I did not know enough to be cautious enough. Between the 3rd and 4th infusions, Mr. T invited me to dinner in Shinjuku. He had a business meeting in the afternoon and Nothing planned for the evening. We picked an izakaya at random, an underground place 2 blocks from the east exit of the station. We sat down at noon. We got up at 7. 7 hours. None of the conversation was about his disease. He talked about a huge Japanese company he had done deals with in his 20s, where the person who greeted him at reception was not the person who took him to the meeting room, who was not the person who introduced the director, who was not the person who handled the dinner afterward. One person, one function, executed to a craft standard. He told that story with admiration, not resentment. Then he talked about doing business in mainland China. The theatrical dinners, the senior officials, the banquets. He was skeptical of all of it. By the time you are at the table with the senior official, the deal is already 90% done. If you walk in hoping the alcohol will open a door, you have already lost. Inside of 18 months, I will be doing business in China myself. And the framework Mr. T gave me became the grid I hung the experience on. In the last hour, he stopped telling stories and started teaching. He leaned forward. He put his chopsticks down. He had had a lot to drink by then, but his eyes were still clear, and he delivered 3 sentences. First, don't overthink. No one can see the outcome before it arrives. Move first and then think. Second, adapt on contact. You only learn what the next step is after you take the first one. Flexibility is everything. FARD. A small company's only advantage is that it can change direction at any time. Do not give that up. Once you give that up, you are a slow company without the resources of a big company. The worst possible position. Written on a page, those 3 sentences look something from an airport business paperback. Delivered across a restaurant table by a man in the middle of simultaneous chemotherapy, anti-PD-1 infusions, and an investigational cell therapy. They landed differently. Somewhere in the middle of the 3rd lesson, he said lightly, "Mr. Lin, I assume you have never had a morning where you needed to assemble 20 million renminbi by close of business, or the entire company falls over. That's about 400 million yen, in case the number helps. If you haven't had that morning, it's hard to explain what it does to how you make decisions. I had not. A 0 revenue month had been enough to make me lose sleep. 20 million RMB before 10 a.m. was a scale of pressure I had no file for. Your little company still has flexibility, he said. Got it. We lost ours a long time ago. I understood, finally, why he was spending 7 hours of a short remaining life teaching a man 1 year younger than him how to run a business. He was not doing it because he liked me. He was doing it because he could see in my situation something he had lost and could not go back to. Mr. T did his follow-up imaging in Fukuoka at a private hospital I will not name. He went in for routine restaging between infusion cycles. One afternoon he called me, Mr. Lin. The scans this visit came back unexpectedly clean. He said it in the tone of a man reporting the weather. No drama. No tears on the line. I want to be careful here, because this is the part of the chapter that, told badly, would become exactly the kind of chapter I set out not to write. One patient scan coming back clean at one point in a course of treatment does not prove anything about the therapy. Mr. T was taking 3 agents simultaneously, alongside whatever else his body was doing on its own. No one could tell you with the rigor that the word cause requires which input produce which output. Most of the other patients who went through a clinic for the same protocol did not see what Mr. T saw. Some improved briefly. Some did not improve at all. Some died during or after treatment. The more friendly version of this chapter would focus on the one patient whose scans came back clean and quietly forget the others. I am trying not to write that version. The others were in my car too. What is true is that Mr. T specifically has been alive and without recurrence for 10 years at the time of this writing. He is one of perhaps 30 out of several hundred patients I have assisted who is still alive. That ratio is the one I think about. When I hung up the phone that afternoon, I walked out into the street. The Fukuoka weather was unexpectedly clear. In this line of work, a phone call is usually bad news. You pick up the phone already bracing. A call that delivers a good scan hits a different surface in your head. The sunlight from that afternoon I can still see. Mr. T's reaction when he hung up was also his own. He did not cry. He did not thank God. He said, "Ha. I guess miracles actually do happen." His wife said the same thing in almost the same words. She was laughing, a careful laugh. You know what is strange? The months he has been sick have been the easiest months he has had in years. He runs a big business. People chase him all day. Once he got sick, nobody had the heart to chase him anymore. His sickness was the calmest time of his life. A household's response to a diagnosis is a household characteristic, not an individual one. Mr. T's calm was not only his calm. It was the calm of the people he lived with. I remember the date, October 28, 2016, a Friday night. I was in the Fukuoka office, about to close up for the evening, when the phone rang. It was C Corporation. A mid-level staff member, not Mr. O, the CEO. The Ministry of Health and Labor, together with PMDA personnel, had conducted a surprise inspection of A Clinic's Minato Ku'u premises earlier that day. Regulatory findings had been issued. Treatment was suspended. The clinic was ordered to halt operations. Please notify the patients currently in the protocol. I put the phone down. I did not cry. I did not swear. I did not call anyone. The first thing I did was open the laptop on the desk and pull up the patient list. 8 active patients. 4 from Taiwan, 2 from Hong Kong, 2 mainland Chinese. 2 of them had sold houses to afford the protocol call, in the literal sense of the phrase title transferred, deeds exchanged, bank account credited, cash wide to Tokyo. The proceeds of those 2 houses were currently frozen in cell culture form in a laboratory freezer in a Minato-ku office building that was no longer legally permitted to thaw them. By 8 a.m. the next morning, every phone number on the list was going to call me. I needed to have the list clean before the phones started. I needed to know who was mid-infusion, who was between cycles, who had just bank tissue, who had already paid the next installment, and what the refund position was for each of them. I needed it because without it, by noon the next day I would be answering the same 6 questions from 8 different families in 8 different tones, and I would get something wrong. This is not presence of mind. This is what 3 years of small business operating had drilled into me. When something collapses, do the next small thing. Make the list. Write the sentences. The emotions would arrive. Give them something to find. My wife was in the apartment. D, my employee, was still at the office. Both of them understood from my posture that something was wrong. Neither of them asked. They gave me the room. I finished the list around 1 in the morning. Then the emotion did arrive. The first feeling was confusion. This is supposed to be Japan. This was the phrase my brain kept looping on, as embarrassing as it is to write now. Japan was supposed to be the country where the rules are followed, where medical regulation is precise, where things like this do not happen quietly inside ordinary office buildings with the Tokyo Tower in the window. That feeling was the one I had to give up first. It was the beginning of a longer education. Looking back now, what collapsed on October 28 was not actually the Japanese medical system. What collapsed was my cartoon of the Japanese medical system. Every country's regulatory apparatus has seams between the rule on the page and the rule as enforced. Japan's apparatus is careful and, on balance, more careful than most. It is not infallible. No country's is. The myth I had been carrying of a Japan where the state caught every problem before it reached the patient was mine to shed, not Japan's to apologize for. By the end of that week, I had traded the word myth for the word system. Systems can be flawed. Systems can be repaired. Myths only break. The truth I had not admitted to myself before that night was that I had never independently verified anything about a clinic's operations. I had taken Dr. F at his word that the clinic held the necessary licenses, that the facilities met the applicable standards under Japan's regenerative medicine law, that the procedures were being conducted as described. My verification procedure for a system that could end a person's life had been a physician told me so. I had been in no position to verify. I was a materials engineering graduate. Dr. F was a physician with decades of experience. Mr. O was a man in his 50s who ran a Tokyo company. When Mr. O said, "Write me a weekly report, track your pipeline, tell me your conversion rates," I swallowed it. He was a supplier. I was a downstream channel. After the inspection, Mr. O himself vanished. For most of the first week and the week after it, he did not answer calls. His secretary said he was out of the office. I flew to Tokyo. At reception, I was told he was in a meeting, and then that the meeting had run long, and then that he had been called away unexpectedly. The only people talking to me were two mid-level staff who, to their credit, stayed at their desks and took my calls. When I finally sat across a table from Mr. O in person, on my third trip up, the tone was corporate confidence. These are small administrative issues. The equipment needs a minor adjustment. We will be operational again next month. Next month became the month after. The month after became the quarter after. Dr. F, when I cornered him in the same period, fell back on authority. I am the physician. You are the referral agent. What do you understand about this? I had not been in the laboratory. I did not know what the CPC audit had found. He knew I could not cross-examine him. He used it. In the private medical economy, soon is the most expensive lie in the language. C Corporation told me in October 2016 that CPC certification would be re-established soon. The actual answer, which I did not learn until many years later, was 8 years. They did not successfully recertify until roughly 2024, 80 plus months of soon. 8 patients were mid-protocol when the clinic shut down. None of them had heard of C Corporation. From their point of view, the person who had referred them was me. I was the name on the communications. I was the voice on the phone. When the protocol stopped, I was the person whose phone they called. The calls started the morning after. I had expected fury. What I got in most cases was something harder to handle: exhaustion. These were patients who had been organizing their lives around a treatment schedule for months, who had given up other treatment options to commit to this one, who had paid deposits, who had flown in from 3 countries, who had arranged their work calendars around infusion dates. They did not have the energy for fury. The question almost every family asked was not who is at fault. It was not are we getting our money back. It was one question repeated in different accents and different registers. When can we resume? I did not have an answer. Ch.4 did not have an answer, or if they did, they were not telling me. There was no alternative clinic. Fusion cell therapy was not a generic procedure. A clinic and Ch.4 were the entire supply. I spent weeks calling around Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Fukuoka, looking for a facility that could pick up the protocol for the patients mid-course. There was no such facility. The refund position was ugly. Ch.4 took the stance that cells already prepared or banked were non-refundable even if they would never be infused. Only deposits on unperformed work could be returned. I relayed this to families whose father or husband was dying and who had been told that the product they had paid for was sitting in a freezer in a clinic that was no longer allowed to use it. There's no good way to relay that. I said it as plainly as I could, and I apologized over and over for something I had not caused. Some of them accepted the apology. Some of them did not. From late October through the Chinese New Year, I went to the office every day and sat there. The desk had nothing on it. No computer running, no documents out, no case files. A lamp, a cup, a glass. The glass had highball in it. Japanese whiskey, carbonated water, a lot of ice. Not because I was a whiskey drinker. Because the ice melted slowly and a single glass could last 2 hours. And 2 hours was the unit I was measuring time in. I remember the specific sound the ice made against the side of the glass. A small glassy clink that would come once every 3 or 4 minutes. The cubes shifted. I counted them. It was a way not to think. The pattern was this. I would wait for my wife to fall asleep in the apartment a few blocks from the office. Then I would come back to the office alone and sit at the desk until 3 or 4 in the morning. I would pour one highball. I would finish it. I would pour another. Some nights I pretended to be working. Most nights I was not working. I was sitting. The emotion was not sadness. Sadness at least has shape. What I was sitting in was hollowness, a blankness more complete than grief. I could not think about the patients because thinking about the patients required an energy I did not have. I could not think about the next move because there was no next move. I could not think about my wife because I was not going to admit to my wife how bad it was. I could not think about my parents in Taiwan because I was not going to admit to them that their 33-year-old son had bet on Japan and was losing. Physically, I was not alone. My wife was 3 blocks away. Dee was in the office during the day. My mother called from Taipei every week. Nothing about my life on an observer's checklist would have registered as isolation. Internally, I have not been that alone since. Somewhere in the middle of that winter, I did a strange thing. I bought a textbook for the Japanese real estate licensing exam, the Taken sheet, and started studying it late at night next to the highball. An absurd choice on its face. The answer was that I had realized on the night of October 28 that I had been living in Japan for 6 years and had never properly learned the country's civil code. I had taken Japan's surfaces at face value, and those surfaces had once failed me. The textbook pages stained with highball condensation were a ceremony I was performing on myself. Stop trusting the authority in the suit. Read the law. My wife did one thing during those months that I want to record here. She did not tell me to stop drinking. She did not empty the bottle. She did not sit me down for conversation. She had a gift for not doing the thing a more assertive spouse would have done. What she did was this. On the night she noticed I had come back to the office, she would at some point in the early hours show up with a bowl of hot noodles, sometimes a don, sometimes instant ramen with an egg cracked into it, sometimes thin salmon with a splash of soy sauce over it. Never anything elaborate. A bowl, a pair of chopsticks, and it was said in front of me without speech. She did, on 1 or 2 nights, say exactly one sentence as she put the bowl down. Well, it can't get much worse than this. That was the whole commentary. Flat matter of fact, almost cheerful in the way certain Taiwanese women deliver absurdities that the situation requires. It was not an argument. It was not a diagnosis. It was a small reminder that the flaw had already happened, and we were standing on it, and the bowl of noodles in front of me was a reasonable thing to do next. The trick was that once a bowl of hot food is in front of a person, the person eats it. And once the person eats it, the person stops drinking long enough for the stomach to remember it is a body. And once the body comes back online, the person is tired. And once the person is tired, the person goes home and sleeps for a few hours before doing it again the next day. She never once said, drink less. She let the bowl do the same. Those 4 months, when I think about how I got through them at all, were carried by those bowls. By February, 4 months after the shutdown, Corporation sent word that treatment might be resumable in some form in the near future. I do not remember exactly what the message said. I remember the feeling. It was not relief. It was flat tiredness. By the time treatment was notionally available again, half the patients were gone. Some had died. Some had given up and gone home to finish the course on standard oncology in their own country. Some had stopped answering my messages. Our policy had always been once a patient or family has signaled they are done. Do not chase them. Do not call for updates. Do not run satisfaction surveys on the dying. The dignity of walking away has to be respected. I lost 4 patients that way. Not to cancer directly, though cancer took most of them in the end. To the interval. One of them, a construction contractor from southern Taiwan who had brought his younger brother into the business, had told me on one of our last car rides together that he was caught between the family he had built and the family he had come from. He was not asking for advice. He needed someone to hear it. I learned late that a coordinator's most valuable service to certain patients is listening, not talking back, not offering strategies, listening. He stopped returning my calls 3 weeks after the shutdown. I did not push. There is a particular grief associated with losing a patient whose treatment was stopped not by biology, but by regulation and a broken supply chain. That grief does not metabolize the way clinical grief does. I carry it still. Mr. T, meanwhile, was alive. He was back in Taipei, back in his business, back on the phone, with the same intensity he had always had. Word of his case traveled through his commercial circle. People asked him what had happened. He answered honestly 3 therapies, one of them investigation at a clinic that was now in regulatory trouble. Outcome unexpectedly good. Causation unclear. A few of his contacts, the ones with capital, had a different question. If this technology is real, is there a way to invest in it? Do good, do well. I mentioned in passing during a phone call that Ch.4 was in financial distress and that Mr. O had gone functionally silent since the shutdown. Mr. T heard the undertone. He had been in rooms where acquisitions of distressed assets happened. He knew what I was describing. A week later he called back. "Oh, Mr. Lin, I know some people. A Chinese private equity group based in Zhejiang. They're in pharma adjacent. They might take a look at Ch.4. I passed this along to Mr. O in a short message. Mr. T has mainland investors who might be interested in your platform. Would you like an introduction? The response was immediate. The man who had been unavailable for 4 months, who had taken days to return a text, picked up the phone inside of 10 minutes. Anytime you want to come to Tokyo, Mr. Lin, I'll pay for the flight. I'll take you to dinner. Whenever is convenient. We met 2 nights later in a basement restaurant near Ginza, the first place with an open table. He was still in the suit, tie straight, shoes polished. What had changed was inside the suit. The bearing was gone. The dismissiveness was gone. He talked for 2 hours about the vision of the technology, the potential of the market, the breakthrough nature of the science. He used the word together more times in that meal than he had in the previous 2 years combined. I watched him and made a note I have kept since. When they are selling you, listen, but do not believe. The deeper lesson was this: if a regulator as serious as the Japanese Ministry of Health could spend years certifying this facility and still find, on inspection, that something was badly wrong inside it, then I, with no scientific training and no audit rights, had no hope of independent verification. The only authority I could rely on was the state's authority, and even that, on its bad days, would miss things. Japan's medical system was a system, not a shield, not a myth. A system. Systems can be imperfect and still worth trusting carefully. Myths can only break. That was the reframing I carried out of the basement restaurant. I flew back to Taipei a week later to sit down with the Mr. T in person. The short version of what he was proposing was Chinese capital, a refinancing, a chance to keep the platform alive long enough for the next Mr. T. I said yes. I said yes for one reason, and I should state it plainly. The technology had worked for one patient I knew by name, whose face I could see across a table, whose cancer had receded on imaging for reasons no one could fully explain. If the entire enterprise had been fraudulent end to end, Mr. T would not have been sitting across from me. The conclusion I drew, that the technology was sound and the management had failed, was, I now think, too generous. I was projecting the single data point I could see onto a system I could not see. Looking back, that naivety was almost certainly dangerous. It was also the only thing that would let me catch the second ball Mr. T was throwing me 4 months after the first one had shattered. There was one thing I had to do before the deal could move forward. The Chinese investors wanted me in Hangzhou for meetings. A Taiwanese passport does not get you into mainland China. What you need instead is a Taibaozheng, a travel document issued by the mainland authorities. In 2016 and still now, you apply for it at the Chinese embassy in the country where you live. The Chinese embassy in Tokyo is in Minato, in a compound on Modo, Ezebu, less than a kilometer from the Minato-ku office building with the Tokyo Tower in the window. The geography of that month was narrow. High wall guards wide gate. I had never been inside. I had never, in fact, set foot on what the Chinese state considers Chinese territory. My politics up to that point had not been friendly to Beijing. I had stood with the sunflower protests in 2014, the student occupation of the Taiwanese parliament that tried to block a services trade agreement with China. In 2017, Li Mingqi, the Taiwanese NGO worker, would be detained in Guangdong and would eventually serve 5 years in a Chinese prison on charges his government called political. That case was already in the air when I stood in front of the Tokyo embassy. I walked up to the gate. I showed my documents to the guard. The guard waved me through. The moment I crossed the threshold, I thought, with a clarity I am not going to decorate, this might be where my life stops. That sounds melodramatic. It did not feel melodramatic. It felt like a practical note. A Taiwanese citizen walks into a jurisdiction whose sovereign claim on him is, from his own government's perspective, unrecognized. The odds of a problem were very low. The odds were not zero. Li Mingqi had walked through a similar gate in Macau and not walked back out. I took a number. I sat in the waiting room. I filled in the Chinese language forms with a blue pen. An hour later, the clerk stamped my application and told me to come back in 2 weeks. I walked back out through the gate. Track was moving on Gayan, Higashi D right. A woman in a business suit was walking her dog past the embassy wall. I got into the Fukuoka office around 10 that night. My wife had left a note on the desk that said, "In Mandarin, welcome home, noodles in the fridge." The travel document came through 14 days later. The flight to Hangzhou was booked 2 weeks after that. The fusion cell therapy described in this chapter was an investigational protocol under study in Japan at the time of the events described. Regulatory action against the clinic in question is a matter of public record. The clinical interpretation of any individual patient's course, including the patient referred to as Mr. T, is outside what this chapter attempts to establish. Nothing written here is a claim of efficacy, a treatment recommendation, or medical advice. Cancer treatment decisions should be made with qualified physicians who know the patient's history and the current clinical guidelines. That is the end of this chapter. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next one.